The sacred grove thrummed with ancient magic as the full moon cast its silver light through the canopy above. Tonight was the night of binding, when fated mates would join their souls before the entire pack, their bonds witnessed by moon and stars alike. Elrian of House were stood among the gathered wolves, his heart hammering against his ribs, as he felt the familiar pull of destiny calling to him across the sacred circle. As an Omega with the rare gift of empathetic sight, Elrian could see the true emotions of those around him painted in brilliant colors that danced like aurora around their forms. The excitement and nervousness of the unmated wolves created a symphony of gold and silver lights that only he could perceive. But there was only one aura that mattered to him tonight, one that had been growing stronger in his awareness for months like a beacon calling him home. Kale Tarangite stood across from him, the young pack leader's imposing figure silhouetted against the ceremonial fires. Everything about him spoke of strength and authority, from his broad shoulders to the way other wolves instinctively deferred to his presence. His dark hair caught the firelight, and his storm-gray eyes held the weight of leadership that had been thrust upon him at such a young age. Around him, Elrian could see the deep blue of determination mixed with streaks of silver anticipation, the colors of a man ready to fulfill his destiny. The elder raised his staff, and the gathered wolves fell silent. Tonight, under the blessing of the full moon, those called by fate will step forward and claim their eternal bonds. Let no one stand between what the moon goddess has decreed. His voice carried across the grove with the authority of centuries, and Elrian felt the pull between him and Kale intensify until it was almost overwhelming. This was the moment he had dreamed of since he first understood what it meant to have a fated mate. The invisible thread that connected them had been growing stronger with each passing day, and now it blazed between them like spun starlight, visible to every wolf present. Elrian took a step forward, then another, his bare feet silent on the soft earth. Around the circle, other wolves were moving too, drawn to their destined partners by forces older than memory itself. Kale's eyes found his across the fire, and for a moment Elrian saw something flicker there, recognition perhaps, maybe even tenderness. The silver thread of their bond became visible in the moonlight, stretching between them like a bridge built from hope and destiny. Elrian reached out his hand, fingers trembling not with fear, but with anticipation of the moment when their bond would be sealed forever. And then everything shattered. I will not bind myself to an Omega who cannot even meet my gaze without trembling. Kale's voice boomed across the grove, loud enough for every wolf present to hear. The words hit Elrian like physical blows, each one more devastating than the last. You are a disgrace to my name, to this pack, to everything we stand for. I reject this bond. Through his empathetic sight, Elrian could see the truth of Kale's emotions painted in stark, terrible colors around him. Deep crimson shame twisted with black hatred, not for Elrian himself but for the perceived weakness of being bound to someone the pack might see as lesser. The young alpha's aura writhed with self-loathing and fear, the fear of appearing weak before those he was meant to lead. The world seemed to slow as Elrian watched Kale reach up and grasp the silver thread that connected them. His face was hard, emotionless, as if the tender moment they had shared just seconds before had never existed. With one sharp motion, he tore the bond apart and cast the broken pieces into the ceremonial fire. The flames consumed the remnants of their connection, and Elrian felt something inside his chest tear apart with a pain so intense it stole his breath. The agony was indescribable, like someone had reached into his soul and ripped out half of it, leaving jagged edges that burned with every heartbeat. Through his gift, he could hear the shock and pity of the gathered pack, their emotions crashing over him in waves that threatened to drown him completely. Some whispered among themselves, others stared openly at his humiliation, and still others looked away as if his pain was something shameful they couldn't bear to witness. The other bonding ceremonies continued around him as if nothing had happened, couples joining their lives together in the ancient ritual while Elrian stood frozen in the center of it all, broken and bleeding inside. The elder's voice was gentle but carried an undertone of disappointment that cut deep. Return to your place, child. The moon goddess works in mysterious ways. Somehow Elrian managed to move his feet, to step back from the fire and fade into the shadows at the edge of the grove. He watched as Kale stood tall and proud, unmarked by what he had just done, while Elrian felt like he was dying from the inside out. The ceremony continued around him, but he was no longer part of it. He was nothing now, a rejected Omega, a failed mate, an embarrassment to his pack and his family name. The days that followed were a blur of shame and isolation that seemed to stretch on forever. Word of his rejection spread through the pack like wildfire, and everywhere he went he felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on him like a physical force. Pack members who had once greeted him with respect now looked through him as if he had become invisible. The other Omegas, once his friends and confidants, now crossed the street to avoid him, fear written in their auras as they worried that association with a rejected mate would bring them bad luck. The pack council met in emergency session to discuss what to do with him. An Omega without a mate, especially one who had been publicly rejected, was seen as unstable and potentially dangerous to the pack's social order. "You bring dishonor to House Weir," his pack leader told him bluntly, the words cutting through him like silver blades. "Your presence reminds everyone of weakness, of failure. Perhaps it would be better if you found somewhere else to live." They took away his family name first. He was no longer Elrian of House Weir, no longer part of the proud lineage that had served the pack for generations. He was just Elrian now, unaffiliated, unwanted, cast adrift without the anchor of belonging that had defined his entire life. Then they came for his dwelling, the small cabin on the outskirts of pack territory that had been his sanctuary and his home. He watched from a distance as they set it ablaze, the flames consuming everything he owned, every memory of the life he had built, every token of the person he had been before the rejection shattered him. The fire burned bright against the night sky, a beacon of his shame visible for miles around. His books, his clothes, the small mementos from his childhood, all reduced to ash and smoke carried away on the wind. The Alphas were the cruelest of all. Some mocked him openly, their taunts following him through the pack lands like hunting howls. Others looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust that made his skin crawl with shame. "Maybe if you had been stronger," one of them said as he passed by the training grounds, the words designed to cut deep. "Maybe if you had fought for what you wanted instead of just standing there like a wounded deer." But what was he supposed to have done? Force Kale to accept a bond he didn't want? Beg him to reconsider while the entire pack watched? The laws of fated mates were clear and ancient. Both parties had to willingly accept the bond or it could not be sealed. He couldn't make Kale want him, couldn't force love where there was only shame and rejection. After a week of this treatment, Elrian made the only choice he had left. In the dark hours before dawn, when the pack slept and the forest held its breath, he gathered the few possessions they hadn't burned and slipped away from pack territory like a thief in the night. He headed for the Edge Forest, a wild and dangerous place where exiles and outcasts went when they had nowhere else to turn. The forest was ancient and deep, its trees so old and massive that they blocked out most of the sunlight even at midday. Strange creatures lived in its depths, things that had once been human or wolf but had been changed by old magic and centuries of isolation. It should have been terrifying, but after what he had endured, the prospect of facing monsters seemed almost peaceful. At least the creatures of the forest were honest in their dangers, unlike the pack that had torn him apart with false promises and broken bonds. Legend spoke of a dragon that dwelt in the heart of the forest, an ancient being who collected rare and unusual creatures as trophies for his vast hoard. They said he lived in a tower of flame and shadow, surrounded by treasures beyond imagining, and that he had little patience for visitors who disturbed his solitude. Elrian found himself drawn toward the center of the forest, no longer caring if the stories were true. Death might be a mercy compared to the hollow ache where his soul used to be. He survived on roots and stream water, sleeping in caves and hollow trees, slowly making his way deeper into the forest's heart. His empathetic sight showed him the emotions of the creatures he encountered, most of them tinged with the wild madness of isolation and magical corruption. But they left him alone, perhaps sensing that he was already broken beyond their ability to harm. It was on his 7th day in the forest that he encountered the dragon's domain. The tower rose from the forest floor like a spear thrust into the sky, its black stone surface seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Flames danced around its base without consuming anything, a display of power and magic that should have sent him running in terror. Instead, Elrian felt only a strange sense of relief. This would be his end, then, consumed by dragonfire or added to an ancient creature's collection. It seemed fitting somehow, a final rejection to cap off his string of failures. He had barely approached the tower's base when a figure emerged from the flames like something born from the fire itself. Tall and lean with features that were almost human but not quite, the dragon in his humanoid form was beautiful in a way that was both terrible and mesmerizing. His skin had a subtle golden cast to it that seemed to glow with inner fire, and his eyes were the color of molten gold, ancient and knowing and filled with the weight of centuries. When he smiled, Elrian caught a glimpse of teeth that were just slightly too sharp, a reminder that beneath the elegant exterior lay something far more dangerous than any pack alpha. "You're not very good at staying hidden," the dragon observed, his voice carrying an unusual quality like whispered promises of flame and shadow. "Most creatures who venture this deep into my domain have the sense to approach with more caution." "I'm not trying to hide," Elrian replied, surprised by how calm he felt in the dragon's presence. "I have nowhere else to go." Most creatures in the forest radiated danger, but this being felt different. Powerful, yes, but not malevolent in the way he had expected. "Ah." The dragon studied him with those flame-colored eyes, and Elrian felt as if he was being examined and catalogued like one of the ancient texts in the pack's archives. "You're not from the forest originally. You smell of pack lands and rejection." The dragon stepped closer, moving with inhuman grace that spoke of predatory power held in perfect check. "What did you do to earn such punishment? Murder? Theft? Betrayal?" "I was rejected by my fated mate," Elrian said simply, the words still cutting like glass even as they came out steadier than he had expected. To his surprise, the dragon laughed, but it wasn't the cruel mockery he had grown accustomed to from the pack. Instead, it held a note of genuine amusement mixed with something that might have been sympathy. "That's it." The dragon shook his head, golden hair catching the firelight. "You were cast out for someone else's failure of character? Pack politics never cease to amaze me." He gestured toward the deeper parts of the forest, toward his tower of flame and shadow. "I am Zair, keeper of this domain and collector of interesting things. You have an unusual quality about you, a stillness that speaks of inner strength rather than weakness." Something in the dragon's tone made Elrian look at him more carefully. Through his empathetic sight, he could see layers of emotion around Zair that were far more complex than anything he had encountered before. There was curiosity there, yes, but also loneliness so deep and ancient it took his breath away. And there was something else, a recognition that spoke of shared experience with rejection and isolation. "You can see more than most, can't you?" Zair continued, tilting his head as he studied Elrian's face. "Emotions, intentions, the songs that hearts sing when they think no one is listening." When Elrian nodded, startled that the dragon could perceive his gift so easily, Zair's expression grew more thoughtful. "Rare and valuable. I could use someone with your abilities." "What would be the terms of such an arrangement?" Elrian asked, though he wasn't sure why he was negotiating instead of simply accepting whatever the dragon offered. After weeks of having no choices at all, the simple act of being consulted felt strange and precious. "Food, shelter, protection from those who would hunt you," Zair replied, extending his hand. Elrian noticed that his palm was marked with symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the firelight, old magic made manifest in flesh. "In exchange, you work for me. Nothing more complicated than that. I have need of a scribe, someone to help maintain my collection, to translate ancient texts, and to provide companionship that doesn't bore me to death after the first century." In Zair's amber eyes, Elrian saw something he hadn't seen from anyone in weeks. Not pity, not disgust, not even mere tolerance, but actual respect for who he was and what he could offer. The dragon was offering him a place, a purpose, a chance to be useful again instead of just a burden to be cast aside. "We have an agreement," Elrian said, taking the offered hand. The moment their fingers touched, he felt a spark of something electric and warm. Not the destined pull of a fated bond, but something perhaps more precious. The beginning of a connection chosen freely rather than imposed by cosmic forces. The tower was nothing like what Elrian had expected from the outside. While it appeared to be made of black stone that absorbed light, the interior was warm and welcoming, filled with comfortable furniture and walls lined with books and artifacts from across the known world. Windows showed views of places that definitely weren't the surrounding forest, magical portals that displayed everything from tropical beaches to snow-capped mountains to cities that gleamed like jewels under alien stars. Magic, Zer explained when he saw Elrian staring at a window that currently displayed what looked like an underwater palace. The tower exists in several places at once. Convenient for business, if somewhat disorienting for newcomers. He led Elrian through corridors lined with treasures that would have made kings weep with envy, but none of it felt like a hoard in the traditional sense. Instead, it was more like a vast library or museum, with each item carefully cataloged and preserved. Elrian's rooms were on the third floor, a suite that included a bedroom, a small sitting area, and a workspace where he could carry out his duties. They were simple but comfortable, and after weeks of sleeping in caves and under trees, they felt like the height of luxury. The bed was soft, the fireplace provided warmth against the mountain chill, and there were actual books on the shelves, something he had feared he might never have access to again. "What exactly will my work involve?" Elrian asked as Zer showed him around the tower's vast library. Rooms upon rooms filled with texts in dozens of languages, some of them so old their pages seemed to whisper with age. "Translation primarily," Zer replied, pausing at a table covered with scrolls and books that seemed to glow with their own inner light. "I have texts in languages so ancient they're barely remembered by anyone still living. Your gift should help you understand the emotional context behind the words, which is often more important than the literal meaning." He glanced at Elrian, and for a moment his carefully controlled expression slipped, revealing depths of loneliness that made Elrian's heart ache in sympathy. "There's also organizing to be done, correspondence to maintain, and the occasional research project." "And the companionship you mentioned?" Elrian asked, curious about this aspect of his duties. Zer was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes distant with memories. "I have lived for over 1,000 years, Elrian. Do you know how difficult it becomes to find conversation that doesn't bore you to tears after the first century? Most beings are so predictable, so limited in their thinking. But you," he studied Elrian's face intently, "you might be different." The work proved to be engaging in ways Elrian hadn't expected. The ancient texts were filled with wisdom and beauty, stories of love and loss and triumph that resonated across the centuries. His empathetic gift helped him understand not just the words but the emotions behind them, the hope of a long-dead poet, the despair of a conquered king, the joy of lovers reunited after years of separation. Each translation was like solving a puzzle, piecing together not just language but the very hearts of those who had written the words. Zer proved to be an excellent teacher and, as the weeks passed, an increasingly comfortable companion. He was brilliant and well-traveled, with stories that spanned continents and centuries, but more than that, he was kind in ways that were subtle but meaningful. He never mocked Elrian's ignorance when he encountered something unfamiliar, never made him feel lesser for being an exile without a pack. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in Elrian's perspective, in the insights that his empathetic gift provided. "You don't seem like the dragons from the old stories," Elrian told him one evening as they worked together in the study. Translating a particularly complex ritual text, the firelight flickered over ancient pages, and the comfortable silence between them was broken only by the scratch of pens and the occasional question about a difficult passage. "What did the old stories say about dragons?" Zer asked without looking up from his work, though Elrian could see the amusement coloring his aura in warm gold tones. "That they were cruel and manipulative, that they delighted in corrupting the innocent and stealing souls for their hoards," Elrian replied, then paused as he realized how that might sound. "I didn't mean to imply that you—" "Some do," Zer said matter-of-factly, his tone suggesting he took no offense at the observation. "But then, some wolves delight in cruelty as well. Some humans, some elves, some of every species I've encountered over the centuries." Evil isn't determined by what you are, it's determined by what you choose to do with the power you're given. And what do you choose to do with yours? Elrian asked, genuinely curious about this enigmatic being who had shown him more kindness in a few weeks than his own pack had in the months leading up to his rejection. Zair was quiet for a long moment. His pen paused over the parchment as he considered the question. I choose to preserve knowledge that would otherwise be lost to time. I choose to help those who seek answers to important questions. And I choose to surround myself with beings who make existence interesting rather than tedious. He looked up then, meeting Elrian's eyes directly. Is that what I do? Make existence interesting? Among other things, yes, Elrian said, feeling heat rise in his cheeks at the directness of the question and the intensity of Zair's gaze. There was something building between them, something warm and precious that had nothing to do with fated bonds or pack politics and everything to do with two people choosing to care for each other. As autumn turned to winter, their relationship deepened from professional to something more personal. They shared meals together, worked side by side in comfortable silence, and spent evenings by the fire discussing everything from ancient philosophy to the migration patterns of birds. Elrian found himself looking forward to Zair's company in ways that had nothing to do with employment, and the dragon seemed equally pleased by their growing friendship. It was during one of winter's worst storms that everything changed between them. Elrian had been feeling unwell for several days, not sick exactly, but restless and uncomfortable in his own skin. His scent had been shifting too, becoming sweeter and more intense in ways that made him self-conscious around Zair. He tried to hide it, but the dragon's enhanced senses made that impossible. You're going into heat, Zair said bluntly one morning over breakfast, his golden eyes serious as he studied Elrian's face. The words hit like a physical blow, and Elrian nearly choked on his tea. I what? He managed to say, though he could feel the truth of it even as he spoke. His body was changing, preparing for something he had never experienced before. Heat. It happens to unmated omegas, though usually not as intensely as what you're experiencing. Zair's tone was clinical, but Elrian could see the concern in his aura, warm orange worry mixed with something darker that he couldn't quite identify. When was your last cycle? I've never had one, Elrian admitted, embarrassed by the confession. The pack healer said it was because of my bond with Kale, that my body was waiting for our mating to trigger my first adult cycle. Ah. Understanding dawned in Zair's expression, and the darker emotion in his aura intensified. And now that the bond has been severed, your body is trying to complete its natural development. Inconvenient timing, given the storm. The storm he referenced was indeed severe, with wind howling around the tower with enough force to rattle the windows and snow falling so heavily that the world outside had disappeared into white nothingness. Even if Elrian had wanted to leave to avoid the awkwardness of going through his first heat near an unmated male, travel was impossible. I can prepare a room on the top floor, Zair offered, his voice carefully neutral. Far enough away that my presence won't exacerbate your condition. There are supplies there, foods that will help, herbs to ease the discomfort. You would do that for me? Elrian asked, touched by the consideration. Most alphas would have seen an omega in heat as an opportunity to be seized, not a problem to be solved with care and distance. Of course. Zair looked puzzled by the question, as if the answer was obvious. Did you think I would throw you out into a blizzard? Or take advantage of your vulnerable state? The heat hit Elrian like a physical blow that afternoon. One moment he was organizing correspondence in his workspace. The next he was doubled over with waves of need that left him gasping for air. His skin felt like it was on fire, and every nerve ending seemed hypersensitive to the slightest touch. The sweet, desperate scent of an omega in heat began to fill the air, and he could hear Zair moving around the tower with careful deliberation, staying far enough away to avoid triggering his instincts. Zair appeared in his doorway within minutes of the heat's onset, his nostrils flaring as he caught Elrian's scent. For a moment, his carefully controlled expression slipped, and Elrian saw the predator beneath the civilized exterior, the dragon's eyes flashing with gold fire and his hands clenching into claws. But then he mastered himself, his face becoming a mask of professional concern. Come, he said, his voice rougher than usual, barely controlled power thrumming beneath the words. Let me help you to the upper room. The next 3 days were a blur of fever and need unlike anything Elrian had ever experienced. Zaire brought him food and water, herbs to ease the worst of the symptoms, cool cloths for his burning skin. He was professional and careful, never taking advantage of Elrian's vulnerable state, but Elrian could see the strain it put on him. The dragon's own scent became more intense, responding to Elrian's despite his best efforts to remain unaffected. Why aren't you claiming me? Elrian asked him on the second night, his mind hazy with heat fever but still curious. I'm unmated, in heat, and you're clearly affected. Most alphas would see this as an opportunity sent by the gods themselves. Because you're not in your right mind? Zaire replied simply, wringing out another cool cloth with hands that trembled slightly. And because when you come to my bed, I want it to be your choice, not your biology making the decision for you. When, not if. Elrian noticed the phrasing despite his fevered state. Zaire paused in his ministrations, meeting Elrian's eyes directly. I have grown fond of you, Elrian. More fond than is probably wise, given our circumstances. But I won't take advantage of your heat to get what I want. That would make me no better than the pack that cast you out. When the heat finally broke on the 4th day, Elrian felt different. Not just physically, though the completion of his first adult cycle had certainly changed him in that regard, but emotionally as well. The experience had been intense and overwhelming, but having Zaire care for him through it had created a bond between them that went beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship. Thank you, he told Zaire as he finally emerged from the upper room, clean and dressed and feeling more like himself than he had in days. For taking care of me, for not taking advantage, for being honorable when you could have been otherwise. You don't need to thank me for basic decency, Zaire said, but Elrian could see the relief in his expression at having him back to normal. How do you feel? Different, Elrian replied, considering the question carefully. Stronger somehow, like I've finally grown into who I was meant to be. He studied Zaire's face, noting the signs of strain and sleepless nights. It was difficult for you too, wasn't it? Yes, Zaire admitted with characteristic honesty. But not unbearably so. I'm older than I look, Elrian. I have excellent self-control when I choose to exercise it. And if I asked you not to exercise it? Elrian stepped closer, close enough to see the way Zaire's pupils dilated at his nearness. If I told you that what I feel for you has nothing to do with heat and everything to do with the man you've shown yourself to be? Zaire went very still, like a predator scenting prey. What are you saying? I'm saying that I care for you, that these months of working together, of getting to know you, have made me realize that what I had with Kale was nothing compared to what I could have with you. Elrian reached out, placing his hand over Zaire's heart, feeling the rapid beat beneath his palm. I'm saying that if you want me, I'm yours. Not because of biology or desperation, but because I choose you. The kiss Zaire gave him was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he couldn't quite believe this was happening. But when Elrian responded eagerly, pressing closer and opening his mouth under his, Zaire deepened it with a passion that made his knees weak. The dragon's hands came up to frame his face, thumbs brushing over his cheekbones with reverent care. Are you certain? Zaire asked against his lips, golden eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation. I'm not human, Elrian. I'm not even mortal. A relationship with me would be complicated in ways you can't imagine. I'm an exiled Omega with the ability to hear emotions, Elrian replied, smiling at the concern in Zaire's voice. I think I can handle complicated. What followed was the most beautiful night of Elrian's life. Zaire made love to him with a patience and skill that left him speechless, worshipping his body like it was something precious rather than simply using it for his own pleasure. Through his empathetic gift, Elrian could feel Zaire's emotions as clearly as his own. Desire? Yes. But also tenderness, possessiveness, and something deeper that made his heart race with hope. Mine, Zaire whispered against his throat as he moved within him, his voice rough with feeling and power barely contained. My Omega, my heart, my choice. Yours? Elrian agreed, arching beneath him as pleasure built to impossible heights. Always yours, for as long as you'll have me. In the morning, Elrian woke in Zair's arms feeling more complete than he ever had before. This wasn't the desperate pull of a fated bond, but something he had chosen freely, something that was his and Zair's alone. The dragon's skin was warm against his, and he could feel the steady beat of his heart beneath his cheek. No regrets? Zair asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Elrian's bare skin. None, Elrian said, meaning it completely. Only that it took us so long to get here. Zair pressed a kiss to the top of his head, and Elrian could feel his smile against his hair. I love you, Elrian. I know it's soon to say it, but I've lived long enough to recognize the real thing when I find it. I love you too, Elrian whispered, feeling the truth of it resonate through every fiber of his being. More than I thought possible. Their relationship transformed from that point forward. They were still employer and employee during working hours, but in private they were lovers and partners. Zair showed him wonders he had never imagined. Other realms accessible through the tower's magic, artifacts that held the power of ancient civilizations, knowledge that had been lost to the world for centuries. But more than that, he showed Elrian that he was worthy of love exactly as he was. Not stronger, not different, not improved in any way, just himself with all his quietness and sensitivity and strange gifts. It was during the spring that they encountered Eris. Elrian had been exploring the ruins of an old temple about an hour's walk from the tower when he heard crying echoing through the ancient stones. Following the sound, he found a small figure huddled in the shadow of a broken wall. A child perhaps 8 or 9 years old with cuts on his arms and terror in his dark eyes. The boy was unlike any being Elrian had seen before. His skin had a translucent quality to it, as if he were made partially of shadow, and when he moved, wisps of darkness seemed to follow him like living smoke. But his tears were real enough, and the pain radiating from him through Elrian's empathetic gift was heartbreaking in its intensity. Hey there, Elrian said softly, crouching down to the child's level with his hands visible and empty. Are you hurt? The child, for despite his strange appearance that's clearly what he was, looked up at him with eyes too old for his face. Are you going to hurt me too? He asked in a voice barely above a whisper. No, Elrian said firmly, his heart breaking at the question. I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Elrian. What's yours? Eris? The boy said after a moment of hesitation, studying Elrian's face as if trying to determine whether he could be trusted. I don't have a family name. I don't have a family at all. The story came out in fragments over the following hour. Eris was half-human, half-shadow creature, the result of a union between a human woman and a being from the plane of shadows. His mother had died when he was very young, and he had been passed from relative to relative, none of whom wanted to care for a child who reminded them daily of otherworldly influence. The last family said I was cursed, Eris explained, showing Elrian the fresh cuts on his arms with matter-of-fact acceptance that made the rejection even more heartbreaking. They said shadow children bring bad luck. They hurt me and told me to go away, that I should find somewhere else to die. Looking at this frightened, injured child, Elrian felt something fierce and protective awaken in his chest. Well, they were wrong, he said firmly, his voice carrying absolute conviction. You're not cursed, and you don't bring bad luck. You're just different, and different doesn't mean wrong. Different can be wonderful. You really think so? Eris asked, hope beginning to replace the fear in his eyes. I know so, Elrian replied. Come on. Let's get those cuts cleaned and see about getting you something to eat. I know someone who will understand what it's like to be different. He brought Eris back to the tower, expecting to have to convince Zair to let the child stay temporarily while they figured out what to do with him. But when Elrian explained the situation, the dragon's response surprised him with its immediacy and certainty. He can stay, Zair said without hesitation, kneeling down to examine Eris's injuries with gentle hands that glowed with healing magic. Shadow children are rare and often misunderstood. It would be a crime to let him suffer for something he had no control over. Really? Eris looked between them with wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. I can stay here? With both of you? If you want to, Elrian said, his heart swelling with emotion at the hope in the child's voice. We can't offer you a traditional family, but we can offer you safety and care and people who won't hurt you for being different. That night, as they settled Eris into a room near Elrian's, Zaire pulled him aside with a serious expression. Are you certain about this? He asked quietly. Caring for a child is a significant responsibility, especially one with his unique heritage. I'm certain, Elrian said without hesitation. Zaire, I know what it's like to be rejected for things you can't help. I won't let that happen to him if I can prevent it. And what if his presence here attracts attention? Shadow creatures have enemies, and not all of them will be impressed by our good intentions. Then we'll protect him, Elrian said simply. All of us together. Zaire studied his face for a long moment, then smiled with an expression that was equal parts pride and affection. You continue to surprise me, my heart. Yes, we'll protect him. All of us together. Eris brought light into their lives in ways Elrian hadn't expected. His initial fear gradually gave way to curiosity, and then to genuine joy as he realized that Zaire and Elrian truly meant to keep him safe. He was incredibly intelligent, absorbing knowledge like a sponge and asking questions that kept both of his new guardians on their toes. Why do people fear shadow creatures? He asked one evening as the three of them sat by the fire. Zaire reading aloud from a book of fairy tales while Elrian worked on a translation and Eris practiced writing letters in the ancient script. Because they don't understand them, Zaire explained patiently, setting down his book to give the question the attention it deserved. Shadow creatures have abilities that seem strange to those who live entirely in the light. Some people fear anything they don't understand, rather than trying to learn about it. But you're not afraid of me, Eris said, looking between them with the directness that only children possessed. No, we're not, Elrian said, pulling the boy closer against his side. We think your abilities are interesting, not frightening. Can you show us? Zaire asked gently. Only if you want to, of course. Eris looked between them uncertainly, then seemed to make up his mind. He held up his hand, and slowly, shadows began to gather around his fingers like living smoke. With careful concentration, he shaped them into small figures. A wolf, a bird, a flower, each one perfectly detailed despite being made of nothing but darkness. That's incredible, Elrian breathed, watching the shadow wolf pad across Eris's palm with lifelike grace. You're an artist, Eris. You create beauty from shadow. You think so? The boy's face lit up with pride and happiness. The other families said it was creepy. The other families were idiots, Zaire said firmly, his golden eyes flashing with protective anger. Beauty comes in many forms, and yours is unique and wonderful. Over the following months, they settled into life as an unlikely family. Zaire continued his work as a keeper of knowledge and dealer in artifacts. Elrian assisted with translations and research, and Eris served as their apprentice and, more importantly, the heart of their strange household. The boy's laughter filled the tower with warmth, and his endless curiosity kept all of them engaged and entertained. But their peaceful existence was shattered one autumn morning when strangers appeared at their door. Elrian sensed them before they knocked, the familiar pack scent of home mixed with anger and suspicion. Through his empathetic gift, he could hear their emotions clearly: disgust, fear, righteous indignation, and underneath it all, a familiar presence that made his chest tighten with old pain. Pack wolves, he told Zaire and Eris as they gathered in the main hall, his voice steady despite the turmoil he felt inside. At least 6 of them, possibly more. They're not here for a friendly visit. Can you tell what they want? Zaire asked, his demeanor shifting into something more dangerous as flames began to dance around his fingers. Me, I think, Elrian replied, taking a deep breath to steel himself for what was coming. They're angry about something they blame on me. Then we'll talk to them, Zaire said firmly. All of us together. You're not facing your former pack alone. When they opened the door, Elrian found himself face to face with members of his old pack. led by someone he had hoped never to see again. Kale stood at the front of the group, looking every inch the proud alpha he had always been. His winterstorm eyes were hard with condemnation, and his presence commanded attention from every wolf behind him. "Elrian," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Or do you still use that name, despite bringing shame to it?" "I use the name I was born with," Elrian replied, proud that his voice remained steady in the face of Kale's intimidation tactics. "What do you want, Kale?" "We want answers," Kale said, his tone suggesting that he expected immediate compliance. "The Borderlands have been experiencing magical disturbances for months. Twisted creatures, corrupted plants, reality itself seeming to bend in unnatural ways. The trail leads here, to this tower, to your new associates." His gaze shifted to Zer, and Elrian saw recognition flicker in his eyes. The Alpha knew what Zer was, and he didn't like it one bit. "You live with demons now," one of the other pack members spat with disgust. "You've betrayed everything our people stand for." "I live with someone who treats me with respect and kindness," Elrian replied, feeling anger flare in his chest at the insult to both himself and Zer. "Something I never received from the pack. Respect." Kale laughed harshly, the sound cutting through the morning air like a blade. "What respect does a demon show its pet? You're nothing but a plaything to him, a curiosity to be used until he grows bored and discards you like the broken thing you are." The insult to both him and Zer made fury rise in Elrian's throat, but before he could respond, Zer stepped forward. The temperature around them seemed to rise several degrees, and Elrian caught a glimpse of flames flickering in his golden eyes like captured starlight. "You will not speak to him that way," Zer said, his voice carrying undertones of power that made even the Alpha Pack members shift nervously. "Elrian is my chosen mate, my partner in all things, and he deserves respect from anyone who enters my domain." Chosen mate. Kale's expression twisted with something that might have been jealousy, his carefully controlled facade cracking to reveal the pain beneath. "You mean claimed property. Demons don't form bonds. They take what they want and discard it when they're finished." "You seem to be confusing demons with werewolf alphas," Zer replied coolly, his words hitting their target with surgical precision. "Elrian chose me, and I chose him in return. Neither of us was coerced, neither of us was desperate, and neither of us settled for less than we deserved." The barb hit its mark perfectly. Kale's face darkened with rage, and several of the pack members behind him growled low in their throats, their own anger feeding off their alpha's emotional state. "You've corrupted him?" Kale snarled, his composure finally cracking completely. "Turned him against his own kind with your dark magic and false promises." "I didn't turn him against anything," Zer said, his power becoming more visible now as flames wreathed his hands. "Your pack managed that all on their own when they cast out one of their most valuable members for the crime of being rejected by a coward." "How dare you?" Kale began, but Zer cut him off with a gesture that sent sparks flying through the air. "How dare I what? Tell the truth." The dragon's calm facade was beginning to crack, revealing the ancient predator beneath. "You rejected your fated mate publicly, humiliated him in front of his entire community, and then allowed that community to exile him for your failure. And now you have the audacity to come here and suggest that he's the one who chose betrayal." The confrontation might have escalated into violence, but Eris chose that moment to appear in the doorway behind them. The pack members reacted to his presence with visible alarm, their fear spiking as they recognized what he was. Shadow creatures were the stuff of nightmares to most werewolves, ancient enemies from the time before the Great Pact had established boundaries between the realms. "Elrian." Eris's voice was small and frightened as he took in the tension radiating from the assembled wolves. "Are these the bad people who hurt you before?" "Not all of them," Elrian said gently, kneeling down to the boy's level while keeping his eyes on the pack. "Some of them, yes, but don't worry, they're not going to hurt any of us." "The child is shadow-touched," one of the pack members whispered, and Elrian could hear the fear in his voice like a living thing. "The corruption is spreading. First the Omega consorting with demons. Now they're harboring monsters." "He's not a monster," Elrian said, standing and placing a protective hand on Eris's shoulder. He's a little boy who needed a home and people who would care for him. We gave him both. This ends now, Kale declared, his alpha authority making his voice carry across the clearing with undeniable force. You will return with us to face judgment for the magical contamination you've caused. The demon will be banished from Packlands, and the shadow creature will be dealt with according to ancient law. Ancient law? Elrian felt ice form in his veins as he realized what Kale was suggesting. You mean you want to kill him? Shadow creatures are abominations that corrupt everything they touch, Kale replied with the certainty of someone who had never questioned the beliefs he'd been raised with. It would be a mercy. The protective rage that swept through Elrian was unlike anything he had ever experienced. This sweet, intelligent child who had brought so much joy into their lives, they wanted to murder him simply for existing, for being born different. No, Elrian said, and his voice carried a power he didn't know he possessed. You will not touch him. You will not threaten him. And you will leave our home immediately. Your home. Kale stepped closer, trying to use his size and alpha presence to intimidate Elrian into submission. You have no home, Omega. You were cast out, rejected, abandoned. You're nothing but a stray that a demon decided to keep as a pet. I am more than I ever was when I lived among the pack, Elrian replied, meeting Kale's gaze steadily without flinching. I have work that matters, love that fulfills me, and a family that shows me freely chosen affection. What do you have, Kale? A pack that fears you more than they respect you? Leadership built on intimidation rather than inspiration? A life so empty that you have to travel for days just to hurt someone who never wronged you? Through his empathetic gift, Elrian could hear Kale's emotions clearly now. Rage, yes, but also pain and regret and a loneliness that matched what he had felt during his own exile. The Alpha had made his choice at the bonding ceremony, but it hadn't brought him the satisfaction he had expected. I made the right choice, Kale said, but there was doubt in his voice now, uncertainty creeping into his aura like cracks in a foundation. The pack needs strong leadership. The pack needs wise leadership, Elrian corrected, his voice carrying conviction born of hard-won experience. Strength without wisdom is just brutality, and brutality is what you're proposing now. The murder of a child whose only crime is being different. It's not murder, it's protection, Kale insisted, but even he seemed to hear how hollow the words sounded. Protection of what? The pack is miles away from here. Eris has never set foot on pack lands, has never threatened anyone, has never done anything but try to survive in a world that hates him for circumstances beyond his control. Elrian stepped forward, no longer the timid Omega who had been broken by rejection. You want to kill him because his existence makes you uncomfortable. That's not protection, that's cowardice. The words hit Kale like physical blows, and Elrian saw him flinch as each accusation found its mark. Around them, the other pack members were shifting nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the confrontation was taking. The magical disturbances. One of them began, but Zer interrupted before they could finish the accusation. Have nothing to do with us, the dragon said firmly. I've been monitoring the magical climate of this region for months. The disturbances you're experiencing are coming from the northern mountains, not from this tower. There's an old nexus point there that's becoming unstable. If you want to solve your problem, that's where you need to look. You're lying, Kale accused, but there was less conviction in his voice now. I'm a 1,000-year-old dragon who has made the study of magic his life's work, Zer replied dryly. You're a werewolf who probably doesn't know the difference between active magic and residual traces. Which of us do you think is more qualified to make this assessment? The truth of his words was obvious to everyone present, but Kale wasn't ready to back down. His pride and his prejudices were too deeply entrenched, too much a part of who he had become to abandon easily. Even if that's true, he said stubbornly, it doesn't change what you are, what all of you are. Unnatural, wrong, a corruption that needs to be cleansed. If we're so unnatural, Elrian asked quietly, then why are we happy? Why do we care for each other, protect each other, love each other? Why does our home feel more like a family than your pack ever did? The question caught Kale off guard, and through his empathetic gift, Elrian felt the Alpha's confusion, his inability to reconcile his prejudices with the evidence in front of him. They weren't the monsters he had expected to find. They were just people who had found each other and chosen to build something beautiful together. Because demons are skilled at deception, Kale said finally, but the conviction was gone from his voice, replaced by desperation to maintain his worldview in the face of contradictory evidence. Is that what you see when you look at us? Elrian asked, his voice gentle now, almost pitying. Deception? Or do you see what you lost when you made your choice at the bonding ceremony? I lost nothing, Kale snapped, but the words lacked their former power. I made the right choice for my pack. Did you? Or did you make the choice that felt safer? The choice that didn't require you to be vulnerable, to open your heart, to risk being hurt. Elrian studied Kale's face, seeing the pain the Alpha was trying so hard to hide. I know what it feels like to be afraid, Kale, but courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. And you think running away to live with demons was courageous? Kale asked, but there was no heat in the words now, only exhaustion. I think building a new life from nothing was courageous, Elrian replied. I think opening my heart to love again after being rejected was courageous. I think protecting a child who has no one else was courageous. He glanced back at Zaire and Eris, drawing strength from their presence. But most of all, I think choosing love over hate, acceptance over prejudice, and hope over despair was the most courageous thing I've ever done. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Elrian could feel the conflict raging within Kale, his Alpha training warring with his personal desires, his prejudices battling against the evidence of his own eyes. This isn't over, Kale said finally, but the threat sounded hollow, empty of real conviction. The pack will not tolerate this corruption on our borders. Then the pack will have to learn tolerance, Zaire said firmly, his golden eyes blazing with protective fire. Because we're not going anywhere. This is our home, and we will defend it against anyone who threatens our family. Family? Kale's voice was bitter, but underneath the bitterness was something that might have been longing. You call this aberration a family? Yes, Elrian said simply, because that's exactly what it was. Not bound by blood or born from traditional bonds, but chosen freely and maintained through love and mutual respect. It's not the family I expected to have, but it's the one I choose every day. As if to emphasize his words, Eris stepped forward and took Elrian's hand, his small fingers interlacing with his guardian's in a gesture of trust and affection. The moment was simple but powerful, demonstrating the bonds that held their unusual household together more clearly than any words could have done. We choose each other, Eris said quietly, his young voice carrying surprising strength. Every day we choose to be a family. Isn't that what love is supposed to be? The innocence and wisdom in his words seemed to pierce through even Kale's defenses. For a moment, his harsh expression softened, and Elrian caught a glimpse of the man he might have been if fear and pride hadn't ruled his choices. But the moment passed quickly as Kale reasserted his Alpha persona, his face hardening again like a mask sliding back into place. You have 1 week, he said, his voice carrying the finality of an ultimatum. 1 week to leave this territory and take your family with you. If you're still here after that, we'll consider you a hostile threat and act accordingly. We're not leaving, Elrian said calmly, his voice carrying absolute conviction. This is our home. We've built a life here, and we're not abandoning it because of threats from people who have no authority over us. Then you've chosen your fate, Kale said, turning to leave. He paused at the edge of the clearing and looked back at Elrian one last time. I had hoped, I had thought perhaps there was still time to salvage something from the bond we once shared. But I can see now that the corruption runs too deep. There never was a bond between us, Elrian replied, his voice free of anger or bitterness, carrying only the weight of truth. You made sure of that. What you're mourning isn't what we had. It's what you threw away. After the pack left, the 3 of them stood together in the doorway, watching the wolves disappear into the forest. Elrian felt drained by the confrontation but also strangely liberated. He had faced his past and stood up to it, had defended the life he had chosen without apology or compromise. Are they really going to come back and hurt us? Eris asked, his voice smaller than usual, the bravery he had shown during the confrontation giving way to the natural fear of a child faced with adult dangers. They might try, Zer said honestly, his arm coming around both Elrian and Eris in a protective embrace. But if they do, we'll be ready for them. How can we be ready for a whole pack? Elrian asked, voicing the practical concerns that were already running through his mind. There are only 3 of us. 3 of us with very particular skills, Zer corrected, his golden eyes gleaming with fierce determination. You can hear their intentions before they act on them. I have magic powerful enough to level mountains if necessary, and Eris has abilities they don't understand and can't predict. You really think we can defend ourselves? Elrian asked, though he could already feel his resolve strengthening at the confidence in Zer's voice. I think we can do more than that, Zer said, his expression growing thoughtful. I think we can show them that different doesn't mean wrong, that chosen families can be just as strong as blood families, and that love is more powerful than hate. And if we can't convince them? Elrian pressed, wanting to understand all their options. Then we protect what matters most to us, Zer said simply, his voice carrying the weight of absolute commitment. By any means necessary. The week that followed was tense but productive. Zer began teaching both Elrian and Eris defensive magic, skills that could help them protect themselves and each other if violence became unavoidable. Elrian worked on expanding his empathetic gift, learning to project emotions as well as read them, while Eris practiced controlling his shadow abilities with increasing sophistication. But more than preparing for conflict, they used the time to strengthen the bonds between them. They talked about what their family meant to each of them, what they were willing to sacrifice to protect it, and what kind of future they wanted to build together. I've never had a real family before, Eris told them one evening as they sat together by the fire, the familiar comfort of their routine made more precious by the knowledge that it might be threatened. Not one that wanted me around. I thought there was something wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you, Elrian assured him, his voice carrying absolute conviction. You're exactly who you're supposed to be. Even if I'm different? Eris asked with the directness that only children possessed. Especially because you're different, Zer said firmly. Difference is what makes life interesting. Conformity is overrated. Is that why you chose Elrian? Eris asked, turning to look at the dragon with curious eyes. Because he's different? Zer looked at Elrian, his expression soft with affection and something deeper, more profound. I chose Elrian because he's kind and intelligent and brave, because he sees beauty where others see only strangeness, because he makes me want to be better than I am. He reached over and took Elrian's hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. And yes, because he's different from anyone I've ever known. And you chose him too, right, Elrian? Eris pressed, clearly working through his own understanding of what love and family meant. Even though people said it was wrong? I chose him because he makes me feel valued and loved and whole, Elrian said, his voice warm with contentment. Because he never asked me to be someone I'm not. Because he accepted all of me, the gifts and the scars and the fears, everything that makes me who I am. That's what real love is supposed to be like, Eris said with the wisdom of someone far older than his years. Accepting all the pieces, even the weird ones. The pack returned on the 8th day, just as dawn was breaking over the forest. But this time they didn't come alone. Elrian sensed them long before they became visible, dozens of wolves, far more than had come the first time. Through his empathetic gift, he could hear their emotions. Determination, fear, anger, and underneath it all, the kind of righteous certainty that made people capable of terrible things. They've brought the entire pack, he told Zer and Eris as they prepared for the confrontation. This isn't a negotiation anymore. They're here for war. Then war is what they'll get, Zer said grimly, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something far more dangerous. Flames danced around his fingers as he spoke, and his golden eyes blazed with protective fury. I won't let them hurt our family. When the pack emerged from the tree line, Elrian was stunned by their numbers. Nearly 50 wolves in human form, armed with traditional weapons and arranged in fighting formation. At their head walked Kale, his face set in lines of grim determination that spoke of a man who had convinced himself that what he was about to do was necessary. You were given a chance to leave peacefully, he called out as they approached the tower, his voice carrying across the distance with alpha authority. You chose to stay. Now you face the consequences. The consequences of what? Elrian called back, stepping forward to meet them despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm him at the sight of so many hostile faces. Of finding happiness? Of building a family? Of refusing to be ashamed of who we are? The consequences of corruption, another voice answered, and Elrian recognized one of the pack's spiritual leaders, an elder who had always been suspicious of anything that didn't fit into traditional categories. You consort with demons, harbor shadow creatures, and practice unnatural magic. Your very existence is an affront to the natural order. What's unnatural about love? Eris asked, stepping forward with more courage than any child should have to show. His voice carried clearly across the clearing, innocent and direct in a way that cut through all the political rhetoric. What's wrong with taking care of each other? You are an abomination, the elder said harshly, his words hitting the boy like physical blows. Shadow creatures are born from the union of light and darkness, order and chaos. You represent everything that should not be. He represents hope, Elrian said firmly, his protective instincts flaring at the attack on their child. He represents the possibility that different kinds of beings can coexist peacefully. He represents love transcending boundaries. Enough words, Kale interrupted, his patience clearly at an end. Stand aside, demon, and let us cleanse this corruption. No, Zer said, his voice carrying such power that several of the pack members actually took steps backward. You will not touch him. You will not touch either of them. They are under my protection, and I will destroy anyone who threatens them. You're outnumbered 50-1, Kale pointed out, though Elrian could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. Powerful or not, you can't fight all of us. Perhaps not, Zer agreed, his calm acknowledgement somehow more terrifying than any boast would have been. But I can make sure that anyone who survives will remember the cost of threatening my family. The battle that followed was unlike anything Elrian had ever witnessed. Zer's magic was devastating, flames that could melt steel, barriers that could deflect the strongest attacks, illusions that turned the pack's numbers against them. But he was vastly outnumbered, and even his considerable power had limits. Elrian did what he could to help, using his empathetic gift to anticipate attacks and warn Zer of threats he couldn't see. Eris contributed too, using his shadow abilities to confuse and disorient their attackers, his small form darting between the combatants like living darkness. But they were still just 3 against 50, and gradually, inevitably, they began to be overwhelmed. It was when one of the pack members broke through their defenses and lunged toward Eris with a silver blade that something inside Elrian snapped. The protective rage that had been building throughout the fight suddenly exploded outward, and he felt power flow through him like nothing he had ever experienced. His empathetic gift, which had always been passive, suddenly became active. Instead of just hearing emotions, he began projecting them, waves of fear, confusion, and despair that struck the attacking wolves like physical blows. Several of them dropped their weapons and fled. Others fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the sudden onslaught of foreign emotions. Stop, Elrian commanded, and his voice carried power that made even Kale freeze mid-attack. This ends now. Elrian, Zer looked at him with amazement and no small amount of concern. How are you doing this? I don't know, Elrian admitted, but the power continued to flow through him, controlled by his will and fueled by his love for his family. I can feel all of them, their fears, their doubts, their secret shames, and I can make them feel what I felt, what we've all felt. He turned his attention to the pack, projecting the emotions he had experienced during his exile. The loneliness, the rejection, the the despair of being cast out by those who should have cared for him. One by one, the wolves began to lower their weapons as they experienced firsthand what their actions had caused. "This is what you did to me," he said, his voice carrying to every member of the pack. "This is what your prejudice and fear created. This is the pain you caused because you couldn't accept someone who was different." But he didn't stop there. He also projected the joy he had found with Zaire and Eris, the warmth of acceptance, the security of unconditional love, the happiness of being valued for who he truly was. He let them feel what it was like to be part of a family that chose each other daily, that supported each other through difficulties, that celebrated each other's differences instead of fearing them. "And this is what you could have," he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "This is what love looks like when it's not constrained by tradition or prejudice. This is what family feels like when it's built on acceptance rather than conformity." The effect on the pack was profound. Many of them were weeping openly, overwhelmed by the intensity of the emotions Elrian was sharing. Others looked around with new understanding, seeing their companions not as part of a unified force, but as individuals with their own fears and desires. But Kale, whether through alpha stubbornness or genuine resistance to Elrian's power, remained standing. "Enough," he snarled, raising his weapon with hands that trembled with the effort to resist. "I won't be swayed by demon magic and Omega manipulation." "This isn't magic," Elrian said sadly, his heart breaking for the man who had once been his fated mate. "This is truth. This is what you threw away when you rejected our bond. This is what you've been missing all these years." "I chose strength over weakness," Kale insisted, but his voice lacked conviction now. "You chose fear over love," Elrian corrected gently. "And fear has made you into something your pack doesn't even recognize anymore." To prove his point, he projected Kale's emotions outward, letting the other pack members feel what was really driving their alpha. Not noble dedication to duty, but terror of vulnerability, fear of being seen as weak, and a loneliness so profound it was like a physical wound. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Several pack members stepped away from Kale, their expressions shifting from loyalty to pity. Others began to question out loud whether following him into this fight had been the right choice. "You see," Elrian said gently, his voice carrying compassion even as he revealed Kale's deepest secrets. "He's not the strong leader you think he is. He's a frightened man who has spent so long hiding his fears that he's forgotten how to be anything else." "Stop," Kale whispered, and for the first time since Elrian had known him, his voice broke completely. "Please, just stop." Elrian could have continued. He could have destroyed Kale completely, laid bare every secret shame and hidden weakness until the alpha was broken beyond repair. But as he looked at this man who had caused him so much pain, he saw not the enemy who had rejected him, but a person who had been trapped by his own fears for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be free. "I forgive you," Elrian said quietly, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "I forgive you for the rejection, for the pain, for trying to destroy the happiness I found after you threw me away. But I won't let you hurt my family." The power he had been wielding gradually subsided, leaving him exhausted but strangely at peace. Around them, the members of the pack were picking themselves up, looking around with the confused expressions of people waking from a shared dream. "The corruption they spoke of," one of them said slowly, his voice uncertain. "I don't see it. I see love. Real love, freely given and freely received." "Maybe we were wrong," another added, his aura showing the first stirrings of doubt about everything he had been taught to believe. "Maybe different doesn't always mean dangerous." Kale looked around at his pack, his followers who were now questioning everything he had taught them, and Elrian saw something break inside him. Not his spirit, but the rigid control that had been strangling his heart for so long. "I was wrong," he said, his voice barely audible above the morning breeze. "About all of it. About you, about what strength really means, about what the pack needs." He looked directly at Elrian, and there were tears in his storm-gray eyes. "I was a coward, and I made you pay for my cowardice." "You were afraid," Elrian said, his voice free of anger or recrimination. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Kale asked, his composure cracking further. "I hurt you because I was too scared to admit that I loved you. I led my pack here to hurt your family because I was too proud to admit that I had made a mistake." He dropped his weapon and fell to his knees, the proud alpha reduced to a broken man seeking forgiveness. "I have no right to ask, but can you ever forgive me?" Looking down at him, this man who had once seemed so powerful and intimidating, Elrian felt the last of his anger fade away like morning mist. Kale wasn't his enemy anymore. He was just someone who had been trapped by his own limitations until they had nearly destroyed everything good in his life. "I already have," Elrian said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. "But Kale, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending that what happened didn't matter. And it doesn't mean I'm coming back." "I know," Kale said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "I wouldn't ask that of you. You found something here that I could never give you. Something I was too broken to even understand." He looked over at Zer and Eris, who stood ready to defend their family if needed. "They're your real family now." "Yes, they are," Elrian confirmed, his voice warm with love and certainty. Kale nodded slowly, then stood and turned to address his pack. "We're leaving," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of his position even as his worldview crumbled around him. "There's no corruption here, no threat to our lands or our people. There's just a family trying to live in peace, and we have no right to disturb that." "But Alpha," one of the younger pack members protested, clearly struggling to reconcile what they had been taught with what they had experienced. "The elders said." "The elders were wrong," Kale said firmly, and Elrian could see the effort it took for him to admit it. "And so was I. We came here looking for monsters and found only love. That should tell us something about our own hearts." As the pack began to disperse, preparing to return to their own territory, Kale approached Elrian one last time. "I want you to know," he said quietly, his voice heavy with regret, "that seeing you happy, it means everything to me. I destroyed our bond because I thought it would make me stronger, but all it did was make me empty. You deserve the love you found here. You deserve love too," Elrian told him, his voice gentle with the compassion that had always been his greatest strength. "Real love, with someone who sees all of you and chooses you anyway. But you'll never find it until you stop being afraid of your own heart." "Maybe someday," Kale said with a sad smile that transformed his entire face. "But for now, I need to learn how to be the kind of leader my pack actually needs, not the kind I thought they wanted." After the pack was gone, the three of them stood together in the clearing around their tower, processing what had just happened. The confrontation that they had feared would destroy them had instead revealed strengths they didn't know they possessed and confirmed the depth of the bonds between them. "That was incredible," Eris said, his eyes shining with admiration as he looked up at Elrian. "I didn't know you could do that with your gift." "Neither did I," Elrian admitted, still feeling the echo of the power that had flowed through him. "I think it was something that only became possible because I had something worth protecting." "The power of love," Zer said, wrapping his arms around both Elrian and Eris. "It's the oldest magic in existence, and often the strongest." "Are they really gone for good?" Eris asked, voicing the question that was on all their minds. "Or will they change their minds and come back?" "I don't think they'll be back," Elrian said, his empathetic gift giving him insight into the profound change that had occurred within the pack. "But even if they are, we'll be ready. We're stronger together than any of us are alone." "Speaking of being together," Zer said, his tone becoming more formal as he looked between Elrian and Eris, "there's something I've been wanting to discuss with both of you." Elrian and Eris looked at him curiously, noting the shift in his demeanor. "What is it?" Elrian asked. "Elrian and I have been bonded in all but the most official sense," Zer continued, taking Elrian's hands in his own. "We love each other. We've committed to building a life together, and we've sworn to protect and care for each other. But there's never been a formal ceremony, a public declaration of our choice." Elrian's heart began to race as he realized where Zaire was going with this. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to be my partner in every sense of the word, Zaire said, his golden eyes bright with hope and love. To bind our lives together formally and completely, to make the family we've created official and recognized. What about me? Eris asked, and Elrian could hear the worry in his voice, the fear that he might be left out of this new arrangement. You would be our son, Zaire said firmly, turning to include the boy in their circle. Not by blood, but by choice. If you want that. I want that more than anything, Eris whispered, tears of joy streaming down his face. Then yes, Elrian said, his own eyes filling with tears of happiness. Yes, I want to marry you. I want to make this official. I want the whole world to know that we chose each other. The ceremony they planned was unlike anything that had ever been performed before. It combined elements from dragon bonding traditions, werewolf pack customs, and rituals from Eris's shadow heritage, creating something entirely unique to their family. They held it at the autumn equinox, when day and night were perfectly balanced, a symbol of the harmony they had found between different worlds and different kinds of love. The ceremony took place in the clearing around their tower, decorated with flowers and candles and symbols from all their various traditions. There were no guests in the traditional sense, they had no extended family or friends to invite, no community that fully accepted all of them. But the forest itself seemed to approve of their union. Birds gathered in the trees to witness their vows, and even some of the forest's more magical residents appeared at the edges of the clearing, drawn by the power of the emotions they were sharing. I choose you, Elrian said to Zaire as they stood together beneath the stars. Their hands joined in the ancient symbol of partnership, not because fate decreed it, but because you showed me what love really looks like. You gave me a home when I had none, purpose when I felt worthless, and a family when I thought I would always be alone. I choose you, Zaire replied, his voice carrying the weight of centuries and the promise of eternity. Because you brought light into a life that had grown dark with loneliness. Because you showed me that strength comes in many forms, and the gentlest heart can be the bravest of all. They exchanged rings forged from metals that had been touched by both fire and starlight, symbols of the different worlds they came from and the new world they were creating together. Then they turned to Eris, who was practically vibrating with excitement. And we choose you, they said together, their voices blending in perfect harmony. As our son, our family, our heart. We promise to love you, protect you, and support you as you grow into whoever you're meant to become. I choose both of you too, Eris said solemnly, his young voice carrying the weight of absolute commitment. As my fathers, my family, my home. I promise to love you and help you and make our family proud. The moment the final vows were spoken, something shifted in the air around them. It wasn't magic exactly, but it was power of a different kind, the power of commitment freely given, of love consciously chosen, of family deliberately created. It's done, Zaire said softly, his voice full of wonder and satisfaction. We're officially a family now. We were always a family, Elrian corrected, his heart full to bursting with happiness. Now we just have the paperwork to prove it. Years passed, and their love story became legend in the Borderlands. Tales spread of the rejected Omega who found true love with a dragon, of the shadow child who brought light to their home, of the family that chose each other and created something beautiful from their differences. Other outcasts began to find their way to the tower, seeking the acceptance and belonging that Elrian, Zaire, and Eris had built together. What had started as a sanctuary for 3 became a community for dozens, then hundreds. They built new homes in the forest, established schools where children of all kinds could learn together, created workshops where different traditions could merge and flourish. The tower became the heart of something unprecedented, a place where love truly conquered fear and difference was celebrated rather than condemned. And at the center of it all was the love story that had started it all, the bond between a dragon and an Omega and the child they had saved, proving that family isn't about blood or tradition or the approval of others. It's about choice and commitment and the daily decision to love each other exactly as they are. Their story had no ending because the best love stories never do. They continue to unfold, day by day, choice by choice, love by love, creating something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of what came before.